At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation. I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a red beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize the shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is a victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our body is heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. And some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities. Knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. One day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. Exalted. And every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the word of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the south with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom reign from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom reign from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom reign from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom reign from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom reign from the elevation slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom reign from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom reign from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom reign from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom reign, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom reign, when we let it reign from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Just a few questions and talk back. Just what from this video, what struck you? What phrases stuck out for you? Karen.
Well, I've always liked the quote from Amos that I chose to put up there. Let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. But I think we have an obligation, those of us of my generation or older. Kids don't know. They say, oh, it's MLK Day. There's something about Rosa Parks and Busty. And they really don't know. And we were there. And we lived it. I was a little kid, a lot of you teenagers or even adults. And we may not have known about the CCRs, where our parents bought houses in nice neighborhoods and nice schools, so they were all white kids at that school. You know, and my dad will tell you, he was a seminary classmate of Andrew Young, that Dr. King and Southern Christian Leadership Conference people would stay in people's houses because there were very seldom black-owned hotels. And so the church people would put them up. And there were times when they went to Birmingham or Montgomery or whatever, the night after Dr. King stayed there, the house was bombed and the house was bombed and the house was bombed and the house was bombed. And he also never answered the phone, ever, even if his wife, Loretta Scott King. The comment always was, so Dr. King's not here right now, can he call you back? Give us your phone number. So that nobody could know what house they were meeting in or where they were staying. And he lived like that for the 14 years of his ministry. And we all were there, we all remember, we may have seen this on the news, we remember the day he died. It's our duty to pass that along to the next generations.
Thank you. Anyone else? Was there something that jumped out? Go ahead, David.
What jumped out to me was how much the United States has changed since that speech. You know, we have, across the United States, made great change as far, I mean, I'm not saying we're there, I'm not saying that it's, but we recognize that it's a problem, and we've made a lot of changes since that speech. And that's what
Okay.
I think there's quite a bit of difference in the experience in, say, California and Arizona, the western states. We lived for several years in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and it's been up against the years, but I had never lived where there was very definitely the Black community, the white community. There would be signs in restrooms when you check out, not used for the Blacks, or I forget how the word was, but it really shocked me because I hadn't had that experience living, you know, I mean, there is prejudice and you see it, but it wasn't as big.
It wasn't in law the same way.
Yeah. I hope it's changed.
Yeah. Anyone else, what struck you in this speech? Go ahead.
I wanted to go, but my boss wouldn't let me. So I arranged with some San Francisco radio stations to accept collection calls for my friends who were on the march. That had far more impact on my behavior.
Karen, translate. Help us
Um,
hear what he
So
said.
my dad was director of communications for the Northern California Conference of the United Church, or the Council, whatever. It wasn't United Church of Christ, it was all the different churches. His boss was more conservative as a Baptist, so he didn't find the money for my dad to go to the march. But what my dad did, because he had contact with many radio stations, was arrange for them to collect calls from people who were in Washington on the march, and those were put on the air, and he said they had much more impact than just his presence.
Thanks, Christian. Yeah, Steve.
I've always liked about this speech how all the people around Martin Luther King chimed in with the rhythm.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a whole nother drawn that gave him strength.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't the only source of his own strength. It was the whole community.
There was a lot of people walking.
Yeah.
A lot of people wearing out their shoes.
Polly?
Whenever I hear any of his speeches, I'm struck by what a charismatic preacher he was. I mean, this is years later in grainy black and white, and it still comes through. I heard him once in person when I was a teenager, Constitution Hall in Washington. And I don't remember anything of the content of his speech that day, only the power he had to reach the audience. I mean, he was phenomenal. And it also makes me reflect on how it is that in this country we have a difficult time with people who are inspirational like that. And I'm thinking of folks like John F. Kennedy, for example, who, with all his flaws, really could inspire an audience through his words. And those people end up being targets. We can't seem to abide them as a society. They frighten us.
Yeah. Thanks.
I would say Martin Luther King is the perfect balance between fire, water, earth, and air. He knew how to toggle between all of them, be completely balanced and powerful, just like Polly's explaining. And I had a professor at USF, African-American guy, and he did his dissertation on Martin Luther King, and he just said that Martin Luther King knew that he was living on borrowed time, and he just did everything he could.
Yeah.
You know, we
Gave
forget.
his life for his brother.
He had a degree from Morris College, he had a master's degree, and he had a doctorate by the time he was 25.
Yeah.
From Boston University. He was a highly educated, very, capable mind. And every single African American that I ever talked to says Dr. King or Reverend King, and so I use that in my speech. I don't just blur out Martin Luther King. I say Dr. King or Reverend King out of respect. He was amazing.
Yeah. Kevin?
You asked what struck me, what phrases and things.
Yeah.
Like Frederick Douglass before him, one of the things that I like is where he takes popular, my country 'tis of thee, right?
Yeah.
Things that everybody knows, everybody creates, and he points out how much it's not including everybody, even though it says to, and works for the days when all of these things that we profess as Americans, can we get to the day when we actually walk the talk? And that's what struck me is how many times he referenced tropes and things that were popular with it throughout US history, and point out that we haven't always been for everybody.
Yeah. So what from this, you know, what does this indicate for our future as a group? What message, you know, should we take for our mission and life of this church? And that's our, you know, create a welcoming spirit, filled, empowering, you know, get our voices out.
Well, the only thing I can think of is the most famous line that resonates with me: "No man is free until all men are free." We're all in it together. I guess that would be the biggest message for me.
I think it's beyond patching holes. I mean, we're at an age where we give a little time or a little money. That's what we're able to do. But I think we really need to focus on projects that change life, like providing housing or job training or making education better, not just giving food, because food is for a day. It's what's the system that's preventing people from having enough to eat. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the projects we need to concentrate on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Astrid.
I can remember.
Now speak loud.
I can remember being a mother, certainly with 3 young children, and there were, at the time, they started busing the black children up to Knowles and around, and as well, we were mothers, guardians to a couple of families that could come to our house for lunch or anytime they needed help. And I had such a family and followed them through till they were in their 20s, 30s.
You were a co-parent, and many people in this church did that too.
Yeah.
Okay. Karen, tell George what Astrid said.
She said she was a co-parent, like my mother, Mrs. Brock, and Mrs. Bishop.
Yeah. Margaret.
Karen shared her favorite line from the speech.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to share mine. I think it's the first time I really sat and heard the whole speech from start to finish. But the nugget that resonates with me is that he said he hopes that his children will live for the time when they are judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And that content of their character is what I remember and just kind of resonates with me.
Yeah.
We can all aspire to do, because we're all human and do bring judgment with us, and to remember that.
Okay, Kevin's one more thing.
You asked, you know, how could we take what this is and apply it, and I think about what David said. So I think honoring and celebrating the progress that has been made, and also realizing Dr. King would not be satisfied because we're not there yet. And so recognize and celebrate, as he was doing in that speech, many of the changes that had been made, but saying, but we ain't there yet. What do we still need to do? And look for it. And I agree with Karen that some of that is, there's a lot of little bits that we've done, but what can we do to not patch the holes, but raise the boat?
Okay, all right.